What up, though? What up, though? What up, though? Dwayne Barnes, MPA, back for the final week of AAS 477 Black Power. This is a exceptional day for me for several reasons. One, we made it to the end of the semester, and I appreciate all of those who made it this far in the semester. This has been my most challenging one yet, in that the full responsibility on cooking up the curriculum and the resources and everything was on me. I really dug deep to try to find, stories and narratives and capture a time that, was very interesting and difficult to kind of comprehend. I wanted to make it easy enough so if this is your first time going around, you got an understanding, but challenging enough or nuanced enough to where if this wasn't, it still was entertaining and educating for you as well. So I want to thank you for being with me as far as you have. If you're here today and if you've been with me for the duration of this class, man, I appreciate it so much. I appreciate it so much. So I tried something different. Oh, it is. It's working. All right, now let me see if I can share this. Hold on, y'all, real quick. I want to see if I can share this. I'm going live on Facebook today, and I wanted to see if I could share this live video out to my feed. Let me see, without having people necessarily. Yep, it's going. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Okay, cool, cool, cool. So, I want to kind of expand my reach to my Facebook audience too. So I'm live there. Hopefully people can actually see it and assess it. And if you are on Facebook, I'll have my Facebook up. So if you got some questions, you can hit me on there too. So we have a nice discussion today. Outside of just a review of what we're doing. We're gonna do the review a little bit different. But I'm excited about this and I can't wait to get started. So week 10, we will have our, so this is our agenda for the day. We're going to talk about the Black Panther Party and the final chapter there, from about 74 to 80, maybe about 82 when Huey officially disbanded the party. We're going to talk about the church committee. The church committee was the Senate investigation into all the three-letter organizations, CIA, FBI, etc., in the mid 70s that uncovered a lot. We're going to talk school desegregation in the 70s and a little bit of housing rights. So we're trying to close the door on some of those civil rights issues as we get to the dawn of the 80s. Reveal kind of what the church committee, and we kind of already did this, what the church committee found on COINTELPRO and how they attacked Black organizations, specifically the Panthers, and then talk about the Panthers' final chapter. So to do, I want to do a couple things. So the final chapter of the Panthers reveals both the promise and peril of revolutionary politics in America. We do know that. But before I get to that, I want to take this down and I want to talk about our Black Power Defined. Hey, what's up? So our Black Power Defined is a very important part of this course. Black Power Defined is simply our opportunity to identify and share Black power through the lens of the many different players who participated in creating that ideology. It wasn't my task or my job to define Black power for you. I wanted to use the many different characters, many different actors, many different revolutionaries that took part in the revolution and have them define it. So that's a big part of this course. So to do so, I want to hold up. I think I'm getting another one of those situations to where the camera is not working. Hold on. For the past week or so, this has been happening. So I'm going to try something real quick. Excuse me here. Still here with you, just having to recalibrate the camera a little bit. All right, so I'm going from my desktop camera to my webcam here. Give me just a second. Okay. And now from here, I'm going to go and I'm going to update my background. to what I had up today. All right, I'm seeing on YouTube. I'm back up. All right, I'm feeling good about that. And now let me get this updated. We can jump right back in. Excuse the technical difficulties. You know, they happen from time to time. And so we want to definitely make sure we got that worked out before we move forward. Okay. So it looks like my background, hold on. Okay, back up. Okay, good. Looks like my background visualization isn't falling into place. Audio and cameras up, so I'll take that. Okay. All right. So let's jump in. So Black Power Defined. Let's get to that. This is a very important part of the course. It's a very important part of the reason why I wanted to do this. And there'll be more coming from this, and we'll talk about that at the end of the class here today. So I'm gonna share my screen to my Black Power Defined window here. So, you know, we started the class off with a review of all of the content I did before this. So my first class earlier this year, 5 classes, was 477, Economics of Jim Crow. We went from Jim Crow, or from the end of slavery Reconstruction, all the way to 1954. My second class was 477, Power and Protest, which we went from 1954 to 1968, which was civil rights, leaning on a lot of civil rights stuff. And in this class is 1968 to 1980, Black Power. So in a nutshell, I wanted to put our Black Power defined. There was a Black Power ideology matrix that I cooked up, but this is the Black Power defined for this class. So we started week 0. That was my review class with Malcolm X and his ideological work around Black Power ideology, self-determination, do for self. You know, he was a son of a Garveyite, and Honorable Elijah Muhammad was a Garveyite as well. So the whole kind of notion around Black Power for this generation of activists came from Malcolm X. He was the linchpin to everything we talked about, from Black arts movement to the Panthers to the other revolutionary organizations to blaxploitation films, especially the early ones, everything. And so then we went to Stokely Carmichael specifically, and kind of Muhammad Ali on the periphery, because you know, Stokely Carmichael named and identified "We want Black Power" in 1966 and defined what that meant. Muhammad Ali during that same time was fighting against the government for not wanting to go to Vietnam, so he kind of embodied what that meant. You know, do for self, self-determination, making your own decisions, moving in that regard. But Stokely Carmichael was the one that named it and started to define it in his way. And I got to shout out H. Rap Brown. We talked about him a bit, but not as much as I wanted in this class. He's one of my favorite revolutionaries as well. We then moved to week 2 with Huey P. Newton and Bobby Seale with the 10-point platform, program and platform, which was to me, one of the most succinct and frank ideologies for Black Power. And if you've been a part of this class, you have that information. It defined exactly what we want. We want land, bread, freedom, education, right to determine our communities, all these other things that they wanted. It was a really big basis for that. We moved into week 3. We talked more about Fred Hampton, and his approach was a bit different. We talked a lot about Black nationalism and cultural nationalism. Well, he had a perspective. We do it through class nationalism. So, you know, the workers against the workers against the power structure. So he was about building a coalition: Black power for Black people, white power to white people, yellow power to yellow people, red power to red people, brown power to brown people. And that's how he built. And that's why they got him out of here, because he was able to reach all those demographics and was bringing them together. We then went into talking about the Black arts movement, specifically around Larry Neal and his identification of what the Black aesthetic was. And without going too deep into that, the Black aesthetic for the purposes of the Black arts movement was defining Black art by itself, either totally transforming and radicalizing what we knew as imagery in art, and reframing it to what we wanted, or completely overthrowing what we knew and starting anew. And to do that, he was using Amiri Baraka, who was another important figure in this conversation. And if you talk Amiri Baraka, you got to talk Sonia Sanchez around the Black aesthetic. Then we start talking about politics, electoral politics, and Black power. And we look specifically at mayors during the time, 1973, Black mayors in major cities. One, Maynard Jackson in Atlanta, who showed how the power of how political power can turn into economic power through his ensuring that Blacks got a piece of the pie, especially around contracting, which was big during that time. And then Coleman Young in Detroit, who did the same, specifically around opening doors and opportunities. But then, we got to mention Shirley Chisholm as well, the first African-American woman or Black woman elected to Congress, which was a big thing during the 70s as well. We didn't get too much into her, but I wanted to drop her to make sure we're there. We then started to talk about Eldridge Cleaver and his revolutionary nationalism perspective around, there was an issue between where the Panthers were going, and by the time you get to the 70s, so from 66 all the way to around 70, everybody was kind of on the same page. To make a long story short, they got on a different page. Huey wanted to go one way, Eldridge Cleaver wanted to go another way. Eldridge Cleaver wanted to say, no, we getting this popping the same way we said we was. We want a revolution. We want to overthrow the government. And of course, he was saying this from out of the country. But, he had a lot that felt that same way. And so it was a split in the party. He took people who believed in his perspective with him. Huey took the people who believed in reform with him. And it was a really toxic time for the movement. But we know all that was happening because of personalities and, more importantly, COINTELPRO. So we talked about how he said, no, it needs to be an overthrow of this government. And that's the bottom line. We do it through any means necessary. We do it through killing, murder, bank robberies. We do it through overthrowing the government, and the revolution is coming. And that's why we're doing all this, for the revolution. Next, we started to talk about the African-American image in Hollywood through two specific avenues: blaxploitation films, the movies of the 70s, the Mac, Shaft, all those, Cleopatra Jones, Foxy Brown, all of those kind of movies. And what we were trying to get across is, that was a time where Melvin Van Peebles, Mario Van Peebles' daddy, the brother who made New Jack City, his daddy put a movie together called Sweetback, and that was the first kind of template that kicked off the whole blaxploitation kind of genre. But his was a bit different. He put together, and I'm just checking my Facebook over there. He put together a narrative and a theory that went along with Black power. As it went further, Shaft, the Mac, all these other ones, I don't want to get into all of that, but all of those movies, they started to be white controlled image over a Black story. But when Melvin Van Peebles did it, not saying his was perfect, but it was revolutionary in that the character did things we never seen on film before, and most importantly, killed some folks, and he got away with it, the power, and he got away. And some of those tropes were still used in other blaxploitation films, but his was the beginning of it, and that's why we talked about his perspective with Sweetback, Badass Song. The next week, we started getting more into Black labor and entrepreneurship and business, and we settled in on two main Black power defined individuals. One, Earl Graves, the founder of Black Enterprise magazine, using the Black capitalism notion that Nixon made popular as a way to divert from Black power. We talked about his exploits and his perspectives. And then we talked about Earl Afani Hutchinson, who wrote a book called The Myth of Black Capitalism, which was the revolutionaries' perspective of saying, Black capitalism in and of itself isn't a bad thing, but how you're framing it, it never adds up to the years of disinvestment. So yeah, you might get a couple of entrepreneurs doing a thing, but the larger, most important point is that won't be the solve for the issues that you caused over these people over time. So that was also another interesting kind of notion there. As we move forward in the class, week 9, this was last week, we talked about Black music, specifically around funk music, the transition from soul to funk and ownership around that. So we talked about Berry Gordy, of course, being the godfather of Black music, in that owning what you make and profiting off what you make. more of a civil rights kind of a perspective. But then Don Cornelius, how he built and grew Soul Train out of his pocket and out of his mind to be a cultural staple, a music power player, a TV power player that not only enriched himself, but also provided opportunities for Black music to continue to thrive in the mainstream, and to allow for other production of television shows and writers and staff people to get exposure as well. So we talked about that through the lens of economic self-determination. So if you go to and then we'll talk about Elaine Brown today, and women leadership, is, you know, she was the chair of the Panthers over time. So if you look at the issue column here, we look at nationalism, activism, cultural nationalism, political self-determination, revolutionary activism, cultural activism around our image, economic self-determination, and gender equity. These were the primary modes of what Black Power was. Now, this isn't non-exhaustive. There's more out there. This is just what I wanted to use to paint the picture for as far as our Black Power defined. And I'm going to use this to build some more content around, you know, how we define Black Power even in this day and age as well. So now that we're all caught up on our Black Power defined, I want to take a moment and I want to jump into the lesson for today. So today, you know, we're going to be discussing topics that are very unique in that we needed, like more than anything else in the world, we needed ideology that matched where we were. We needed ideology that was with us, and we got that. So we're going to jump into our Black Power defined. Oh, I got none of my little banners up over here. Here we go. Continue fight, Black Power defined. We're going to jump into Chairman Elaine Brown and her story as she took over in 1977 or 1974 through 1977 for the Black Panther Party. So I'm going to play some media here and we're going to get it popping. Give me just a second. Oh yeah, any questions, any comments, throw them in the chat, either the Facebook chat or this chat, and we'll talk about it. This isn't just a one-way conversation. So if you got anything to say, even if it's just what up though, I'll let your boy. All right, here we go. This is Elaine Brown.
The whole scheme of still attempting to make the party look as though we're a group of hoodlums or thugs or criminals.
Elaine Brown is from Philadelphia. She was raised by her mother, Dorothy Clark, who worked to make sure Elaine could attend private schools. In return, Elaine practiced ballet, learned classical piano, and strived to make her mother proud. She would leave for California, where she hoped to pursue a career in music. While working as a waitress at a strip club called the Pink Pussycat, she would meet music producer and FBI spy J. Richard Kennedy. He'd teach her about civil rights, capitalism, and communism.
I go to watch with this young woman, She introduced me to the girls. This is Miss Brown, and she's going to be teaching you piano. Isn't that exciting? Say hello. And they're like, hello, Miss Brown. And I looked at them like, they're looking at me as though I represent some type of hope. I don't represent any hope for them. Piano lessons is not going to help them. They need something more than that. Look how they got these little cheap dresses on, live in this terrible community. Don't have anything going for them. They're poor. I know what they need. I know what they need because I know them. I know them because I am them, and I forgot.
After leaving the Pink Pussycat, she worked for the Harambe, which was a newspaper that published work for many so-called radical organizations. It was created by Ron Karenga, the founder of U.S. Organization or Organization US. He could never stick to one name for himself or the group. She was still working for the paper when Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated. This is when she would attend her first Black Panther meeting, eventually joining the Los Angeles chapter as a rank-and-file member. In 1968, Panther's Chief of Staff David Hillier requested she record some songs. This led to the album Seize the Time, which would then become the theme song of the Black Panther Party. She would also become an editor for the Black Panther newspaper at this time, and in 1971, she would become the Minister of Information.
There are programs that are detrimental to the community that have been supported essentially by the city and put upon the people by the city with really very little understanding on the part of the board members. And there are programs such as the Senior Citizens Transportation Program, which we've mentioned, which we attempted to get pushed through this board or pushed through the city, in which the city rejects through its various bureaucratic rules and so forth and so on. It's very difficult to talk about anything so concrete as someone here being given some side money, but it is very easy to see that the Model Cities program, after 3 years of operation in the city of Oakland and in West Oakland in particular, has done essentially nothing for the people other than put in some streets and a few bus stations that will protect people from the rain partially.
She would first run for Oakland City Council in 1973, coming up short, but in 1974, when Huey P. Newton fled to Cuba while facing murder charges, she would be chosen to lead the Black Panther Party. She was in charge until 1977 and doubled down on the survival programs and elections. Notably, she managed the campaign of Lionel Wilson, who would become Oakland's first black mayor. She was the mind behind the Liberation School, which would be recognized by the state of California as a model school. She would tap Erica Huggins to be the school's director and Regina Davis as an administrator. The school didn't have grade levels, but skill levels. Elaine would teach reading to children who had been deemed as lost causes by other schools, but they thrived at the Liberation School.
Have this transformative moment, and you can never unknow now what you now know. And it's something so big you can never ignore it. And those little girls sparked something in me that said, I do know now what has been my confusion, my pain. It really was never just mine, it was ours.
Almost a year after Huey's return, she would step down from leadership and leave the party in disgust. Regina Davis scolded a male co-worker who felt a woman had no right to do so. The male co-worker beat her, gave her a concussion, broke her jaw, and left her hospitalized in the process. Huey P. Newton failed to condemn the beating. That was enough for Elaine Brown. She would state, the beating of Regina would be taken as a clear signal that the words Panther and Comrade had taken a gender-on-gender connotation, denoting an inferiority in the female half of us. Elaine would quit the Panthers and leave Oakland for LA. She continued fighting for people after she left. Primarily, prison reform became a cause she dedicated much time to. If the Panthers were already falling apart before Huey fled to Cuba, they were done in when Elaine left. Having the only woman to lead the party, the woman who sang the theme song, the woman who founded a school that brought some shine back to the organization and had them praised by the state of California, leave in disgust motivated many others to follow.
Yeah, Chairwoman Elaine, she, I think, had the very unique position of being the first. And I think, and now that I'm older, I can understand how difficult that role was for her to have, in that you walking into a male dominated space. One thing through history that I think is a very interesting misnomer among our culture, not as our culture, but all cultures, but specifically to ours, the brothers always want a place where we can be free and be who we are and be the leaders and the providers and the men that we are. But sometimes we forget that, we all are working this thing together. And so I can only imagine, with the sexism being what it was, just the idea of this is our space for us, how difficult it was for her to be, chairperson. Another thing too, you got to think about it. During the role of COINTELPRO, a part of their plan was to eradicate the men in the party. They did the same with the ladies. We saw what happened with Asada, with Angela Davis. We saw Afeni go with the Panther 21. So it was a very difficult time. I give her props for being able to navigate that. And kind of like how you would see during any time when Obama became the president, it was after the stock market plunged and the housing market was done, and we was on the verge of collapse. When they gave her the chairmanship, the party was in the same direction. COINTELPRO ran through it. Morale was down, so her work was very instrumental in moving the party forward. So let me get my deck back up, and we'll move into our. Yeah, she was awesome too. So let's go into our conversation. Now that we go, starting to see a little edit here need to be made. Let me edit that real quick. All right, there we go. Final chapter of the Black Panther Party. So we're going to look at the years between really 74 into 82, but we'll look at, where we left off last time. Huey returned from being imprisoned on some trumped up charges. He came back. We talked about earlier the split between he and Eldridge and how that had an impact on the party. Half the party went underground. The other half of the party stayed with Huey. And then, they had a very interesting thing. They felt they couldn't trust many people. They felt like they couldn't do much as far as a national organization. So they started to call the chapters home to Oakland and say, we got a new strategy. We're going to focus on the survival programs. We're going to go from revolution to reform. Reform means we're going to try to change the system as it is, as opposed to overthrow the system. So we're going to focus on electoral politics. We're going to focus on survival programs, and we're going to move in that regard. And that's what they did. And the gentleman mentioned it in the video. So they consolidated power in Oakland. We saw that. Want to talk more about, or they want to spend more time feeding the babies, feeding them kids, and those who stayed in the party where the power wasn't concentrated back to Oakland. This is what you do now. We ain't doing that other stuff. So you would see people who were formerly Panthers say, okay, well, I ain't no Panther no more, but I am going to stay in Detroit, Oakland. I'm still going to stay in Milwaukee, Denver, Philly, New Haven, and we're just going to still do these programs. Might be under a different name, but we're not going to stop the revolution. The way we see this. So we saw breakfast programs, health clinics. We saw learning, peer-on-peer learning models, and we saw electoral strategy. So Bobby Seale and Elaine Brown ran for mayor and city council respectively. Neither of them won, but it kind of showed that they're trying to really go through a reformist lens as opposed to a revolutionary one. One thing that they did do was they got the first Black mayor of Oakland elected. So kind of using their power that way. We're in the late 70s, mid to late 70s now. So a lot has changed. And we'll talk about later how the revelation of what COINTELPRO was doing kind of fed into some of this work that we see the Panthers having to change their work into. Let's see. Yeah, we talked about that. Team Huey and Eldridge, the organizational fracture and the movement underground. So specifically around those underground movements, Black Liberation Army and the Guerrilla Brothers and all these other organizations said, no, we still getting it popping. You said we're gonna overthrow the government. That's what I want to do. That's what we're gonna do. That's what we're doing. And that's where you saw a lot more confrontation with police, confrontation with banks, confrontations with bombings and all these other things happening because people were thinking that the revolution was going to happen, that the revolution wasn't going to be televised and it was going to happen the same way it happened in Cuba, same way it happened in the motherland, same way it happened in Asia, that the people on the bottom were through guerrilla war tactics, were going to overthrow the government and they would be in charge. Unfortunately, here in America, that didn't happen for our revolutionaries. So this put Huey Newton in the whirlwind. And when I say whirlwind, I just mean on the other side of the law. After doing all of that time in the joint, and Lord knows, what they did to Brother Huey in there. He has a book called Revolutionary Suicide and another one, To Die for the People, where he talks about kind of what happened to him during that time. But to make a long story short, it was very, very rough on Huey in there. And, when he came out, he had a different perspective. And so when he came home after, consolidating the party the way he saw fit, things changed for Brother Huey. He started to run with the brothers from the pen. When he used to run with the brothers at the coffee shop, who was the revolutionaries. He looked at the underworld as a place to get taken. So if you a pimp, if you a drug dealer, if you one of them, now you pay him like he the mob. And he found himself in a lot of legal trouble within and without the revolution. So he ended up exiled and on the run. Well, he took an exile to Cuba instead of facing some charges that he was supposed to face. And when he did that, he put Chairman Elaine in charge. And so this is the years from 74 to 77. She was in charge. And what she was able to do was, really kind of fortify a woman's role in the party, which was in front. We all know about Kathleen Cleaver and Erica Huggins and Angela Davis and Afeni Shakur. as, you know, powerful Panther members at one time, or Black Liberation Army members, which was kind of the military side of the organization. And so we you know, we knew that was there. But what she did, she wanted to operationalize, you know, what it looked like to have women in the party. Women were always in the party, but sometimes they were just serving in other capacities that the brothers felt they should be. But when she got in charge, you know, sisters went to chief of staff, bookkeeper, which was an important role, the editor of the newspaper, which was an important role. So all these top positions around the country. Then you had some chapters. You know, by 1970, they would say up to 70% of the members were women in the party, due to the brothers being, you know, COINTELPRO'd out of it, or just kind of found another gig, you know, along the way, and in their revolution. So women were always a backbone of the Panthers, and during that time they were as well. And then you had chapters like Des Moines, Iowa, New Haven, Connecticut, which Erica Huggins, Kathleen Cleaver, and them came from anyway, and built up, were headed by women. You know, took on issues around birth control and childcare and sexism in the nation and in the party. So it was you know, it was a time to be in charge. But like always, there's always going to be resistance when you want to change anything. There's going to be resistance, and they had to kind of deal with that. There was some violence that took place among women in the party, and when they called them for help and support, they wasn't getting the kind of help they needed. And so, you know, it was all bad. You know, drugs was in the community. COINTELPRO was having their way, and their effects of it really hurt these people. And remember, these were young people. So, you know, you had a situation where a party of, let's say, 5,000 people total in the country got the full wrath of the government. And this is kind of what happened, you know, from that. Like we mentioned earlier, she was also singer, songwriter. She had the Panther National Anthem and kind of explored her artistic side as well. We talked about the programs. She even found herself in some controversy. You know, the powers that be during that time was playing the game different. So when people start bucking the system or doing and saying something maybe you didn't want to hear, you know, you find yourself, you know, taking care of it another way. It started to kind of devolve. And so, you know, she ended her time as the leader, and the party basically kind of imploded from there. Times were changing, and you know, what once was a beautiful revolutionary organization just met its match against the U.S. government, and, you know, moved on. She left the party. Huey came back from Cuba, and just was had a totally different mindset. And he would later in 1982 disband the party. And in 1989, he was found one night killed in a drug deal that they say. So, you know, that was the final chapter of the party as it relates to this. But we'll always remember these young revolutionaries that caught the country by storm, emboldened thousands throughout the country. And even it took the full fight of the federal government to take those brothers down. So we always applaud and admire and admonish the Black Panther Party. If you watch the Black Panther documentary, Vanguard of the Movement documentary, it starts, I think it's with Chairman Elaine saying the metaphor of if you close 4 people's eyes and you have them touch an elephant, then it's different based on where you touch it. Some people with their eyes closed touch the tail, so they envision, you know, something that's long and rough. Some people touch the tusks and they feel something sharp and heavy. Some people touch the skin and they feel something rough. So they said the party was the same way. It was a lot of young people who were sick and tired of the old school and wanted something different. It was a group of people that want to put the community first. But as the COINTELPRO program ran through the party, it really hurt them. And we'll see here next how that full power of the federal government's internal program did a devastating move. It wasn't imploding because they had bad intentions or because necessarily they had bad actions. They just fought against the U.S. government, and not many acts win that. You look through history. So that takes us to our next conversation around the church committee. Any questions there? Any feedback there? Feel free to drop it. you know, I've tried to tell this story in the most endearing way possible. After the first couple conversations about it, it was tough. I was, looking to find ways to better capture the Panther story. But it was a tragedy, but I think it served to inspire the next generation. I think we'll see a lot more of it coming in these next years and days. All right. So the Senate Select Committee to Study Government Operations with respect to intelligence activities between 1974 and 75, known as the Church Committee. And so I'm going to refer to it as the Church Committee moving forward, but I did want us to see what it was called in full. So I'm going to update my banner here. The Church Committee. And the Church Committee came together. So, in our conversation, and I'm going to take this down for just a second. In our conversation, we talked about a lot of the mistrust that was going on between U.S. citizens and the federal government. You had people fighting a war in Vietnam that a lot of people didn't feel was just. You had government scandals happening. You had Dr. King getting assassinated. You had Malcolm X getting assassinated. You had Kennedy getting assassinated, the other Kennedy getting assassinated, things that you felt you just couldn't trust, Nixon and Watergate and his resignation. And so distrust or mistrust was so heavy with the government, it didn't make no sense. And so after the Watergate scandal, and that's when Nixon got caught trying to get some information from the Democratic National Committee that he had no business getting, so he would win election. It was a taste in the mouths of all Americans saying, what's going on around here? What is going on? We need to figure out what's going on. So a part of what happened is this senator from Iowa, who was a right-wing Republican. I mean, now I don't say right-wing because it's a different time, conservative Republican, but from what people say, a stand-up guy as far as this. And they started a committee to look into what was going on in the three-letter organizations ran by the government. Now, it was a lot that happened, but I'm only going to cover what was going on as it related to COINTELPRO, Black Panther Party, and Black national and Black organizations. So just to make a long story short, it was a committee that met in DC. Well, I'm going to take a step back. Remember, we talked about the Kerner Commission. The Kerner Commission was a group brought together by President Johnson, LBJ, to identify what happened during the long summers of 66, 67, 68, or 66, 67, in the uprisings around the country. And it was one of the first and only committees that actually told the truth about what was going on and how they could fix it. And of course, they didn't take any action on it. This is one that I think is a close second in that they honestly told what happened, and they kind of had to. So for those who haven't been with me, let me take a step back. In 1971, some anti-war activists who were looking to burn draft cards to keep people from getting drafted and going to the army or whatever service they had to go into to fight in Vietnam, they break into this a government office. Imagine if the Panthers was doing that. Imagine if they was breaking into government offices and doing shit like that. They weren't even doing that. But these anti-war protesters, white young protesters, did this, and they was looking for draft cards, and they open up the next file cabinet and they see all of this COINTELPRO information. Make a long story short, they leak it. It goes to the press, and it's out. What happened. So what COINTELPRO was doing was already published in the press. Everybody knew. So when you get to this committee, you couldn't backwalk and say, well, no, this ain't happened. That ain't happened. So when I say it was a close second to the Kerner Commission, they kind of had to be, because the information was already published. And a lot of what we already talked about in our COINTELPRO conversation, specifically around how they were found and what happened, that came from the Church Committee as well. So basically the findings of the Church Committee, and this was televised, just like the Watergate scandal was, or just like the Puff trial was. If you did, if you watch the OJ trial, all those other ones that we seen on TV, basically that the government had assassination plots against foreign leaders, They did illegal domestic surveillance of American citizens, most specifically the Black Power organizations. They had harassment of political activists and public figures, and they planned to undermine people like Dr. King, Malcolm X, and the Panthers, just to name a few. And so let's see here. So some of the key findings, and we've gone through a lot of this because we talked about COINTELPRO and their rise and their fall already, but the church committee put it out on national TV for everybody to watch and everybody to hear. And so even though it couldn't change what happened to those Panthers, it couldn't change the folks who were locked up, it couldn't change the overall perception of them, at least the truth was out, and those who were able to move forward actually did. The use of unethical tactics, the use of a psychological warfare, legal abuses where you trumped up charges on people who didn't even do nothing like that and get them locked up, undermining them in public opinion, false advertising and claims on them, incidents of violence. It'll be situations where the law enforcement were going to shoot up offices and they say, well, no, the Panthers came out shooting first. And we saw that with LA. We saw that with Fred Hampton. We saw that in Seattle. We saw that in Denver. We saw that in New York. We saw that everywhere, every Panther chapter. And they also found out that out of 200 out of 300 and I think it was 20 something acts of COINTELPRO, 290 of them were against the Black Panthers. And so, when we talk about the tragedy of the Black Panthers, we're not talking about, revolutionaries who couldn't get their act together. We weren't talking about people who couldn't get it done. Though personalities and those things do take place in the process, we're talking about people who were undermined in their activities and who was targeted by the government. And so it was good to see how the church committee came back with that information and allowed for, at least those who were interested in seeing another side of the Panthers actually get a chance to see that. And so let's do this here. I have a video I want to show that kind of sums up the church committee's work. So I'm gonna put that on and give me just a second here.
The 50th anniversary of the church committee hearings. Yes. And Frank Church was a very unusual figure from Idaho, a pretty staunch Republican state. And he was a young, gifted patriot whose favorite senator was Bora, a conservative Republican senator. And he was just an upright, very decent person who saw more and more, my God, it's the things we're talking about. Something's not right. People are getting assassinated in other countries. Our government, it doesn't look clean. And one thing after another in a series of events led him to chair the only time a Senate investigative committee actually looked deeply into CIA operations. That was 1975. Fascinating. What made it possible was just a confluence of events. Nixon had resigned. Ford was an unelected president who came from Congress, who didn't want to take on Congress, so he didn't resist Church's investigation, even though his chief of staff, Dick Cheney, was telling him, go after this guy. We got to crush this investigation. But Ford said, no, we can't. And anyway, Supreme Court, and I don't want to get into another huge fight. Next year will be the 50th anniversary.
Yeah. So, in a nutshell, I think that was very well kind of placed on how a church committee happened, because under different circumstances, I couldn't imagine that happening. Politics and was at a very interesting point at that time. And I think that, after the resignation of Nixon and the pardon of Nixon by Ford, a lot of trust was down. And we see after that, Carter comes and kind of salvages the rest of the 70s and into the 80s. So let's move forward in our conversation here. And let's talk school desegregation in the 70s. So this is an interesting part of the conversation for me. As you see Jimmy over my shoulder, I wasn't expecting to have Jimmy out today. Right there, today. Okay, cool. And then, the work over on the other side, what gives me my credentials to do this work. But, in the 70s, it was a very interesting time as it related to school segregation, desegregation, because, we know and we understand that the fight for school desegregation started. We start talking about this. This was the last topic in my first class, AAS 477, Jim Crow. We ended it and I signaled the end of Jim Crow was the beginning of civil rights. And of course it was overlap there, but just for the point of the class, I wanted to put it there. And so school desegregation has a very unique timeline in my opinion. Church committee, we went through that. We know what that stuff is. So the timeline, and I'll use this one, but I'll go a little more in depth where I see fit. The start of this kind of equal rights conversation happens in 1868 with the passing of the 14th Amendment, which is my favorite amendments are the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, and will forever be, until the day I die. 13th, the freedom, 14th, equal protection, and then 15th, the right to vote, with a close second to Civil Rights Act of 1869, which further empowered the 14th Amendment. But equal protection came and said we all have access to everything that Americans have access to. But Plessy versus Ferguson, 1869, said separate but equal, or Jim Crow was the law of the land. So between 1869 and the early 1950s, there was a fight between what would happen. And if you were with me for the Jim Crow class, you would see how Thurgood Marshall and Howard University's best law professors, James Hamilton Houston, they found a way to overturn Plessy in public schools with Brown v. Board of Education that said that segregation in public schools was illegal, which was the start of the process. And then we saw May 31st, 1955, Brown 2. There was so much pushback from that declaration from the federal government that they had to go back and meet again and say, yeah, do it with all deliberate speed. What does that mean, all deliberate speed? And we'll talk about, what that looks like. And then we saw 1957 with the 58 with the Little Rock Nine. We talked about that in the civil rights class, the second class. The Little Rock Nine integrated Central High School. Ruby Bridges, who's still alive today, integrated an elementary school in New Orleans. And then we saw in 1962, James Meredith integrate the University of Mississippi. And then from there, we saw the Civil Rights Act of 1968, which again, barred segregation in public accommodations. And then Green versus the County School Board, which kind of overturned that in all deliberate speed call to desegregate schools to say, we need to deal with the root and the branches right now, get it done now. And so this led to a very unique backlash on both sides because one, we as African Americans, for the most part, we wanted fair schools. The problem was the schools that we were sent to, the schools by and large that we were forced to go to, were inadequate. So a lot less than integration may seem, we wanted the schools with the books that can give us the education we wanted, that can give us the opportunities for employment and to have a better life. we ain't necessarily want to be all up under folks. You know what I'm saying? That's kind of a misnomer. And so, yeah, we talked about Little Rock 9, Ruby Bridges. And so this brought, a lot of resistance. Southern schools we talked about during the Little Rock 9. People would stop going to school. The year after that, they closed the school year down. So it was a missing year that they had in 1958, 59. Violence and protests, mobs ensued outside of schools, etc. It was the growth of these school board committees that would tinker the legal lines. You saw white flight in the form of private schools. So it was, a lot happening during that time to kind of push back from that opportunity to integrate the schools. There were a couple really big court battles that had a lot to say. And I'm looking at my time and see how deep we want to go into many of them. 1971, the Swan decision, the Supreme Court unanimously upheld busing, magnet schools, and compensatory education as constitutional tools to achieve racial balance in schools. We'll get to that. The Milliken ruling, the court backed inter-district segregation plans preventing city to suburb integration, effectively continuing to segregate in the inner cities. That was Detroit. And then we had the Boston busing crisis in 1974. And we'll talk more, but we'll spend a little time on Detroit, but more on the Boston one. That was the big one out of the couple here. Let me see what we got here. Immigration, mid-70s. Okay. So let's take a jump here real quick into, pull this down. We'll talk a little bit. Well, let's do this first. I'm going to drop a video that will further explain this, because what I want to do is I want to make sure that we cover the information, but I want to spend some time at the end kind of talking about what some of the next plans are. So let's look at this video here, and we'll talk a little more about Boston desegregation and segregation as a whole. So I'll share my screen, and I'll put up my main man. Here we go. Integration. Yep, here we go.
In 1954, the United States Supreme Court, in the landmark case Brown versus the Board of Education, held that racial segregation in public schools was unconstitutional. Where desegregation was accepted and implemented, the strategy was successful. But in many parts of the country, it would take much more than a court order to change public opinion rooted in centuries of anti-Black racism. Politicians in county and state governments across the South found ways to go around the laws. Sometimes they slashed state funding for public schools that integrated. Sometimes they supported private academies attended predominantly by white students.
The main thrust behind African-American interest in desegregating was a
see Ohio State
desire
on my
for
screen.
access to quality education. They understood
It's Howard.
that dollars followed white children into white schools.
Nearly 20 years after the Brown decision, many schools remained segregated, even in the North. And nowhere was this more evident than in Boston, Massachusetts. In response, the NAACP presented a class action suit demanding that schools and educational officials should act. In 1974, a federal judge in Massachusetts ruled that students in Boston would be bused from one neighborhood to another neighborhood to balance school systems racially.
Working class whites, one of the things that they have been able to benefit from is being able to send their children to all white schools and the resources and the privilege that comes along with that. And now they're being asked to give that up.
In South Boston, as many as 18,000 students were forced to attend new schools. Angry protesters carried signs, hurled bricks at buses, and blocked school entrances. Opposition to integration continued well after the initial violence subsided. Many middle-class white families moved to the suburbs, abandoning the city's public school system. 60 years after Brown v. Board of Education, American classrooms remain shockingly segregated. A direct result of families continuing to move to the suburbs, taking public funding based on property taxes along with them. The goals of Brown v. Board remain unfulfilled, even though its spirit lives on.
Yeah. So, so I want to talk a little more about Boston. Boston was an interesting situation because I think for two reasons. One, I wanted to get the NACP a little more in the conversation, and they were when we talked about the blaxploitation and kind of the push against that. When we talked about affirmative action in hiring, we talked about the NACP. We brought them up, but they were a major player in the 60s during the civil rights movement as one of the big six, but they were also one of the major players in the 70s as, going on to fight to ensure that all those laws that were passed and all the things that were supposed to be done continue to be done. So shout out to the NACP for continuing that work. Yeah, that is interesting. Very, very interesting. So what was so unique about Boston, and they talked about it a bit in the clip, is the fight for school integration was a big fight, and it wasn't necessarily because we want to sit hand in hand and arm in arm. No, we just want an opportunity to get the quality education. We want books, we want safety, we want there to not be mold, we want there to be a place where our kids can get an education so they can get a job later. This is just the normal stuff. And what the judge basically said is, we're going to take them from one community to another. So instead of fixing the problem, we're going to take you from Roxbury, which was the black part during that time of the in history, to South Boston, which was the poor Italian part of town. And of course, tension ensued. And it was a really interesting example of how we thought Alabama was the only ones doing that. This is only happening in Mississippi. If folks from the north, they come down to walk in the freedom rides and the walk in Selma. Well, what was all that when it was in your back door in Chicago and in Boston and in DC and in Philadelphia and in Detroit, all places that had uprisings. So we could see that was happening. I think my major takeaway was this. Our children were put in harm's way again to fight for rights for our people. People were willing to allow for their children to go into the lion's den if it meant that they could have a brighter future. And if you think about it from one perspective, anytime we send our children out in society, they're going into the lion's den. So what made it a bit easier for our folks to send them to that side of town, because anytime we walk out the door, you're dealing with that stuff. But still, it goes back to the trauma and the want and the sacrifice people were willing to make to ensure that their child would get a proper education. I wish we still had that same notion in our community by and large. I know we do, as we talk about it from a micro level. I am like that. The people I know are like that. The people I know who know are like that. But we know a lot who don't care about education like that. And they got a neighborhood school and will barely send the kids there. So not to beat a dead horse, but it was, the fight that they had resulted in a couple things. One, access to better schools. But is it better if the teacher don't want you there? Is it better if the people in that school feel about you the same way they feel about you the other way? Was it better if you were now sent on the discipline line sooner? Was it better if you were kicked out of school because they had a bias against you? Was it better? That's always the question we have when we talk about integration in a society. And that's why the revolutionary organizations of the 70s kept saying, we don't want to be a part of this. We want to have our own. We don't want this. Y'all don't want us. We don't want you. All we do is we want the opportunity for self-determination in our own community. So in a nutshell, that was Boston. I don't want to belabor that point because I think, Black power. Well, I'll take that back. The balance of this class was trying to balance the want and the need for Black power, but also those who said, you know what, I want what's coming to me from the sacrifices that civil rights paid. So, okay, yeah, I do want my own thing, but the law said we supposed to be getting this. I do want to determine my own thing, but the law said we supposed to have housing. We supposed to have all this stuff that comes in from the Civil Rights Act and the Fair Housing Act and the Voters' Rights Act. We supposed to be able to do those things. So yeah, I do want to overthrow this thing. I hear you, but I also want to be able to elect my own mayor. who look like me, who will help me, who will put businesses in position and our community in position. I do want to go to the classroom where I can send my child to Hampton, Howard, University of Michigan, UCLA, all these other places. I do want a piece of that too, because we're not a monolith. Black folks ain't just want one thing. We want it to choose. That's self-determination. Wanted to choose what our future forward look like. All right. Let's move this conversation forward. In our last AAS 477 Black Power class. Oh, let's talk about the Milken versus Bradley decision that had to do with the city of Detroit or the region, Southeast Michigan region, as it related to school integration. So I'm gonna bring that up, and we can look at that, and then we'll move past school desegregation to our next conversation. Share my screen, and this is a quick one here.
It's well established that equitable principles should guide federal courts intervening to address violations of federal constitutional rights. In Milliken versus Bradley, the United States Supreme Court addressed the reach of a court's equitable jurisdiction. In August 1970, multiple plaintiffs filed a class action lawsuit in Michigan Federal District Court alleging that the Detroit public school system was unconstitutionally segregated. The lawsuit asked the district court to implement a plan to establish a single, non-racial school system. At trial, the district court determined that a combination of federal, state, and local policies had established a pattern of residential segregation in the Detroit metropolitan area. The court ordered the Detroit Board of Education and 53 contiguous suburban school districts to submit desegregation plans encompassing the entire three-county metropolitan area. The school districts appealed to the United States Court of Appeals for the Sixth Circuit, which affirmed in part. The Sixth Circuit agreed that a comprehensive metropolitan area plan was required to remedy segregation in the Detroit School District, and that ordering such a remedy was within the court's equitable powers. The school districts appealed to the United States Supreme Court, which granted cert.
A little context to that conversation. We talked in the final stages of the civil rights class about the uprisings that happened. The big ones in Newark, in Detroit, and in Watts. So a part of the conversation in Detroit, and we've been spending a lot of time in Detroit, Black Arts Movement through Third World Press. We've been talking about Detroit through, a lot of different things. So that's, it's kind of where I'm at. It's my center. So, but what made this interesting was the concept of white flight. So after the uprisings in 67, that sent a lot of white Detroiters to the suburbs, Oakland County, Macomb County, Washtenaw County, and kind of left Detroit as this kind of black hub. And that's why, if anybody been around here, you think about it, so this is a black city, we do the black stuff we do. However, during segregation or during the school desegregation push, so you had already by default the majority of schools in the Detroit public school systems black serving, and the white kids went to Southfield, Oak Park, Bloomfield, all these other places around, even down into Washtenaw County, into Macomb County, the other way downriver, all these different places. And so when they said my weekly sneeze, hold on. That's my one for the week. I usually have one every week. So when you had desegregation, pushed into schools, they were saying, well, look, half of the surrounding districts like we good, and this is y'all, we all right. And what they were saying in Detroit was, nah, it's residential segregation. Y'all moved out and y'all left us here, and y'all undermine the schools, but the ones out there are doing well. And so what we just saw in that video was they said, well, no, you got to get it right. And busing, in fact, did happen here as well. So that was, school desegregation in a nutshell, which, we all feel our own specific and particular way about. And I think as we go into 2026 and think about where we are now, what's best for our students has to remain first. and we have to get on the same plane of what happens. I know personally I'm conflicted. I know a lot of people who are, because it seems like you have to balance either a cultural opportunity or a academic opportunity, and you shouldn't have to choose. And so we have to solve that problem as well. So that's kind of where we are in that discussion. Any questions, any comments, feel free to drop them. Let's see where we at. Okay, still making good time. Okay. Here we go. Let's bring our deck back up just to reinforce a bit of what we just finished talking about. So Swan versus Charlotte, Muckleberg authorized busing. The Milk and Bradley talked about the block the interdistrict segregation we just talked about, and then the Boston busing situation. Oh, it was something I missed here. So maybe it's in my next one here. Yeah, okay, that's good here. Resistance. Yeah, we talked about that. Northern compliance. We talked about that. The Backy case. So this is a very interesting case here. And I couldn't find, or I won't say I couldn't. I wanted to spend a little time on this one. This is in college admissions. And as we've seen, I've personally lived through the death of, and if you're on this call, you have too, of affirmative action in college admissions across the board. When we were in undergrad, we saw what happened in Texas and at U of M. We then saw what happened in California, and just recently we saw it. The Asian contingent pushed for a pushback on affirmative action, and then what they call DEI, which I don't call that this. We saw that die as well. But 1978, a gentleman attempted to get into the University of California Davis Med School, and felt he was discriminated against because he was white. And to make a long story short, took the trial to the Supreme Court. And they, again, in context, this is the end of the 70s. So now we're to the point where an idea of civil rights, an idea of fairness, an idea of action needed to right wrongs is starting to wear very thin in the public. And to make a long story short, the Supreme Court ruled that racial quotas are unconstitutional, but allow race to be a factor in admissions. This was the reverse racism conversation. This was the what we see today as the anti-DEI conversation. You get 400 years of a head start, but because you want to make the equation right now, you're getting, discriminated against. Understanding that usually people from urban backgrounds, and I'm being very generalistic here, come from schools that haven't been as touted as the ones that you've come from. You know that your zip code determines your altitude typically in America, but somehow there can be reverse discrimination against those who have it all, those who have the opportunity, those who go to the best schools, those who get all of that stuff, but somehow you can reverse discriminate based on those charges. So this was the beginning of that push, and it would eventually be the precedent that put affirmative action and the need for justification in our system to bed. And so, just because you ain't good enough to do it, we jump over double hurdles. You ain't good enough to walk and chew gum, and it's a problem, and they change the rules for you. That's America. So let's continue our conversation around fair housing. You remember there's a Fair Housing Act after Dr. King was assassinated. LBJ, who is we talk about like a frenemy, like LBJ was that to us because you saw him pass civil rights legislation. You see him voting rights, this fair housing stuff. But on the other end, empowering the government and COINTELPRO to do their thing. So, you know, it's such a I'm laughing just because it's like sometimes you gotta laugh to keep from crying. That's what I'm doing. So fair housing in the 70s, supposed to outlaw discrimination in housing by race, color, or national origin, and sex was added in 74. The 68 Act was banning discrimination in sale, rental, financing of housing in protected classes. If you remember our conversation around what Dr. King was doing in Chicago in 1966, they went after, among the other things, the realtors who would be the propagators of redlining. So redlining was when, you know, you would only allow for certain people from certain demographics to go to certain neighborhoods. And while it was a de jure thing, by fact, you had to have somebody kind of enforce it. And those were the realtors and the inspectors and the assessors, which is still an issue today. 1974, the Community Development Act, basically the CDBG, added sex as a protected class and expanded coverage. The early 70s saw a slight increase of home ownership, but gaps with the larger society remained enlarged. And that's why we were talking about labor, education, access, opportunities, which will determine your ability to afford a home, where you want to live, etc. We also know that systemic barriers persist even today. The Nixon administration provided insufficient support and lacked any political will for strong implementation. You know, it was a tough time just in general around labor and affording anything that you wanted as far as a home or getting an education during that time. But fair housing was still something that was missing from the equation. So when we talk about these issues, we're talking about where civil rights left off, where some of the Black power was pushing you towards. And of course, you get a lot of lip service legislation, but not a lot of action on them. And the question was always, well, our elected representation at the federal level, the Congressional Black Caucus, etc., are they continuing to do everything they can to see that Black folks get, you know, what they need to empower themselves to continue forward? Let's see what else we got here. And this is one of the last things I wanted to talk about. So one thing that I didn't really talk about a lot during this discussion was the welfare policy during that time. So, you know, one thing that I think the federal government, which in the 60s was forced to help, I think that was a bit of an issue in that, you know, it forced or it made us think that the federal government, well, let me take a step back. From the beginning of African-American progress in this country as it related to laws, it always came from the federal government. Where did the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment come from? Where did the Civil Rights Act of 1866 come from? Where did Brown v. Board come from? Where did the Civil Rights Act, the Fair Housing Act, the Voting Rights Act, where did that come from? It all came from the federal government. So people like, Black folks always leaning on the government. They always leaning on the government. Well, it's because that was at one time one of the only bodies that would rule on the behalf of Black folks. Now, the good of that is, okay, those laws did make it to the books. The other side of it is now you're at the mercy of the federal government. And if you look at a federal government like we see today, it's probably not going to work in your favor. Or like we saw, a couple times during our lifetime. And so one of the things that I want to bring up is one of the calls in the Kerner Commission and one of the calls in Dr. King's work as he started to move from civil rights to economics was a call for reparations, but reparative outcomes. Fix the things that you need to fix, a base level of income, access to jobs with wages that were adequate, training, etc. So to undermine that, along with a couple other things, welfare was put in place. So instead of saying, okay, we're going to put in position opportunities for men to get jobs at a quality rate where they can make a living, be a part of a union, and do everything they can. And now from there, it's up to you. They put together welfare policy the aid to families with dependent children, welfare to homes. Now, a big part of that was the man in house rules. So if there's a man in the house, able-bodied man in the house, you couldn't get no aid. Though we know that provisions for workers or worker discrimination was still a big factor in the 70s. We know that there was an issue around union membership. We know there was just overall discrimination in the workforce. But now if you're a family and need a little help because of on some down times, if it's a man in the household, you can't get that. And so it forced families to have to make a decision. And if you see the movie, is it Claudine, 70s movie Claudine, with Diane Carroll and James Earl Jones. They have a conversation like, this is the A to do this, the A to do that. You can do this, you can do that. You don't need it, you don't need that. That became a big part. So, in the 60s and the 50s, when we saw the Black family as a unit working together, navigating the process, well, this made it advantageous for there to be an opportunity for a family to at least survive without having that man there. During the same time, you see laws that were looking to mass incarceration crack laws, but laws that made it easier for a brother to end up in prison and for the government to provide aid to that family. So this was a big part of the policy in the 70s that was used along with drugs, and that was used along with COINTELPRO and some of the other things to undermine the Black family. Let me see if I can find that scene just to kind of put a let's see, where was that scene at here? Give me just a second. I can't find it. Okay, I thought I had it up, but it's not there. So basically, you can go back to the movie Claudine, and that take you there through that conversation. This was welfare in the Black family, which we saw these same tropes come up, and we'll talk about this in the next class. Around the 80s, how the welfare queen was positioned as, a lazy, shiftless Negro who depended on the government and didn't want to work. After you put the program in there to make them, lean on it that way. So, it was interconnected civil rights struggle as we talk about Black power, housing discrimination, the Black power movement, educational desegregation, economic opportunity, cultural nationalism, revolutionary nationalism, and the like. I think, okay, so I want to do here. I want to provide any space for any questions to be answered, and then just kind of give my last kind of take on the Black power class, and then talk about what's coming in the future. So drop any questions or anything you have in the chat, then we can kind of do that. But until that comes up, I think, when I think about this Black power class, I think about a lot of things, but the Black power defined, I think, is very important. If you were signed up through the email list, you got so many resources. You got the lecture notes with links to information. You got outlines for the lecture. You got every video. You got all of this stuff. As we are in the fight for preserving African-American history, as we're in a fight trying to figure out what the plight will be of our people moving forward, I want you to use this information while it's still online, while it's still available, to get an education around how you want to move forward. I think the most important thing is one, and that's what the Black power defined was about. We don't have to define it the same way, but we all have a role to play in moving not only us forward, but the people we care about, people in our community, people of our skin color that believe the same things. It's very important that we do so. So take advantage of that information. One, so has the welfare queen idea still become a thing? Well, now that SNAP benefits about to be taken away, we're gonna see. And I'll say this: the welfare queen trope was kind of a double-edged sword in that one, it kind of misplaced who was always the main recipient of welfare in this country anyway. They painted it to be the Black woman because they wanted to put, because they put the Black man in jail, and they always wanted to kind of handle that. But we even can see in contemporary times, if you just do a quick Google search by percentage and by numbers, who are the biggest SNAP benefit recipients in this country, you will see who it is. You would see who it is. Like, it's not even like up for debate. You would just see who it is. But they can always lean on that trope and that stereotype to infuriate the lowest educated, the lowest common sense having folks in this country, and that's what they use to do that with. The Black Power class was to show the many different ways that people wanted to attain their power in this country. And my question is to you, what are you doing? Like, there's clearly a war happening right now. What Mobb Deep say, there's a war going on outside no one is safe from. We can't target our way to it. We can't social media our way to it. We can't integrate our kids into this and think it's over. We can't think we're going to go to work and solve this problem. There is an active fight against folks in this country. And either you get prepared or you say, no, that'll never happen. You think with what they got, that'll never happen? You don't think what's going on with ICE could happen? You don't think what's going on with how the economy, not even the economy, how the job market is moving won't happen to you? You don't think martial law gonna come happen to you? And if you ain't willing to do something, then what you know what I'm saying? Real talk. You can try to HBCU your way. You can try to private organization your way. You can try to fraternity, sorority your way. You can try to middle class yourself away. You can try to my degree yourself away. But none of that shit gonna save your ass. So either you get this information, try to figure out what your game plan gonna be, make a plan, and be ready to make some sacrifices like our people in Jim Crow had to make, like people in civil rights had to make, like people in Black Power had to make, or you gonna find yourself with some chains on that you ain't never, but that'll never happen. You be standing there like this, but that'll never happen. 13th Amendment gone, but that'll never, but my organization, but my degree, but my job, but my, and now you going back to swing low, sweet chair, thinking that it'll never happen. So you gotta, it's an action. It's a call to action that you gotta do. And I know the people don't want to hear this. You don't like this. You don't want to hear it, but it is what it is. And so I'm gonna leave it there. The link to this class is up. Send it to somebody who need it. Send it to somebody who want it. Send it to somebody who may need it. And we're gonna leave it there. We're gonna keep it moving. Next steps for me over the next year or so, you'll see a couple things coming from me. One, I plan on doing some live events to take this information to the masses. I plan on doing another course like this to kind of button up the Black history portion of this class, in that a class that goes from 1980 to the year 2000, and then one that potentially goes from the year 2000 to the year 25, really contemporary work. So I hope to put those two together. I'm still trying to figure out what that would look like, but definitely going to be more AAS 477. I want to go deeper on some topics. We covered a lot in these first two classes. We went from 1865 all the way to 1980. So it was a big kind of cursory glance over a lot of stuff, and I didn't get a chance to go as deep as I want to. So I'm definitely going to be doing that. I got a couple of reads that I want to get through in order to do some more content. I got an art project that I want to do to kind of bring some of this information to the forefront, because I am a creative as well. I'm not just an intellectual and a analytical brother. I do it from both sides, and I always have. And so you're just going to be expecting more from the AAS 477 brand, me, speaking opportunities, and more ways to get our people out here, some book clubs that we want to try to get going off the ground, and just an overall way to keep our history and our contemporary times in the view and the focus of everybody. And that is what it is. So I want to, thank everybody for finding their way to this class. I think that if you take some time and go back to the economics of Jim Crow class on my YouTube page, the power and protest class from civil rights on my YouTube page. And this class, you'll see 5, 10, and 11 courses. So I've been putting in my time, a mastery of this topic, and you can expect more coming from me. And I really just want you to share this information, not for views' sake, not for influencers' sake, but just the fact that if we ain't ready with looking at what our ancestors have done, all we can do is trip over those same barriers that our ancestors had to trip over. So, you know, that's that. Now let me get to the celebration part of it. Man, this class has been amazing. The people who I've had a chance to interact with on this, people who I see out in the community say, man, I seen your class, or yeah, I seen your class. I appreciate that so much. I think that one of the most important things is understanding that this work is being seen and being handled. I would do it even if nobody saw it, but the fact that people see it and give me some love and props for it, I need that. It helps me continue on. Cooking up a curriculum for a class is not an easy deal. Ain't nobody holding my hand. Ain't nobody spoon feeding me this information. So taking it from, you know, a whole bunch of things that happen and putting them in a sequenced, subject-based, individual and story-based is a very demanding thing. I enjoy it, but I just want you to know this ain't an easy thing. So when you see me coming with this information, this ain't easy to get up here and do this. To stand in front of people and do this every week. But it's a calling of mine. It's a joy of mine. It's a need of mine. And you'll continue to see more from me. I appreciate everybody who's been along the way in the journey. This is not, it's going to do nothing, help perpetuate fatherlessness in our community. Absolutely. We're going to continue moving this forward. I'm a little behind. That's all right. Can't post comments to certain destinations. Oh, I must have got some on my Facebook. Okay, that's what's up. So yeah, you know, we doing it. We're gonna continue this movement forward. AAS 477 is a brand, and what it basically stands for is independent study. When you get to the 400 level in your undergrad career, you're usually doing something that's gonna take everything you learn from your freshman, sophomore, junior year into your senior kind of exercise. I started to just kind of go high level, but I noticed that a lot of this information needed to go more 101. So I've been providing a lot of 101. I look forward to taking some of this conversation up to the next level. And I look forward to continuing to engage with everybody. Be on the lookout for those who are on my sign-in list for a course evaluation. Like I always send out, I want to know what I can do better, how I can do it better. Also want to thank you guys for being real flexible with me. I started on Wednesday nights. My Wednesdays got taken, so I moved to Saturdays. My Saturdays got taken, so I moved to Sundays. And so now, you know, we're finishing the class on Sunday. We did 10 classes this time. We looked at the plight of the Black Panthers. We looked at the Black arts movement. We looked at Blacks on TV and in film, Blacks in music. We looked at Blacks in electoral politics, Blacks in business, all during the 1970s. And we did it all in 11 weeks. And I look forward to enjoying some downtime and some research time. And you'll see me back again next semester with more content and another opportunity to share our beautiful history. Whether you're ADOS or you're not, whether you are Black or you're not, this information will live and this information will continue to move forward. I thank everybody for being here, and you will continue to hear and see more from me. Maybe repurposing some things so we can keep this movement alive. Shout out to the Facebook crowd. My first time posting on Facebook, and you know, we're gonna do this again. So you know, with that said, I enjoyed this class. It was a labor of love, and I will continue to do my best to present our history, our culture, and our ancestors that gave their life, their freedom, and their time for us. And we got to do the same for the next generation. With that being said, we out. AAS 477, the fight for Black liberation, Black power, 1968 to 1980. We out, baby. Peace.